So welcome everybody to day 3 of the Open Future Forum. As I said earlier in the space, it's been incredibly rich series of not only conversations, but demonstration projects. We've had roundtables for hours every single day on the topics of civic infrastructure and regenerative ag and hunger and food systems. And now today, eco-restoration, climate, and really earth repair. I feel so fortunate and so grateful to have gathered over these last few days. If my work wasn't already inspiring enough, I'm even more motivated and compelled at the power of collaboration and cooperation to do this incredible work that's being done all over the world by incredible people. And yet somehow we still find ourselves siloed and trying to sort of get the resources we need and share the information and move fast enough and quick enough to be effective. However, I feel like one of the things that is a primary tenet of the Open Future Coalition is that we know that the solutions exist. We know that the answers are out there. We know that the interventions are effective. And we also know that there is more than enough resource, not only in capital, but in each other. We are incredibly well resourced. So all that's left is sort of that will to move through whatever barriers are in the way and mobilize together to try to be as effective as we can, not undermining the incredibly rich, complex challenges that we're facing, just that the only way forward is to continue to do this work together. I believe that wholeheartedly. And when I say together, I also mean together in the sense of not only the human realms, but really working with nature to balance, restore, renew, regenerate, reciprocate, and be in a relationship of reciprocity and symbiotic co-creation instead of destruction, to be a restorer species, to work with the natural systems and how they naturally rebalance. Remember, we are part of that natural system. So today's particular topic is to focus on the relationship of water and soil and vegetation and its role in helping to actually cool the planet, restore landscapes, reverse desertification, rehydrate the soil, bring back fertility, support local water cycles, which impact the greater global water cycles, bring vitality, health, and well-being back to places, food security to people, wellness and nutrition to people. The whole compounding benefit index is just staggering when you look at the relationships when we're in balance with these three particular aspects of ecology, how life actually just does what it does and flourishes and it is abundant, and is dynamic and is reciprocal and is ever changing. And so learning how to better work with these interventions feels essential in these times when people are so carbon driven. There's such a carbon tunnel narrative right now that a lot of the folks that I'm working with are saying it's so vital to start really looking specifically at the relationship of soil, of water, and of vegetation, because it's a much more personal conversation than what some people are seeing as very polarized with a really driving carbon drawdown narrative. Not that we shouldn't draw down carbon, but that we're missing so many incredibly important points of the conversation, and therefore they aren't getting the funding, the acknowledgement, or the resourcing they need to be able to be more effectively implemented. So enough from me, because there's more of you here to talk about this. In fact, most of you have been my teachers and mentors in these matters. So I have deep respect for welcoming today Ananda Fitzsimmons from Regeneration Canada, also an author, Frances from the Flow Partnership, Rob DeLaet from the World Climate School, Marcel de Berg, Green Water Cools, Gies, really nice to have you with us, author of Water Always Wins, Thriving in an Age of Drought and Deluge. We have Alpha Low from the Regenerative Water Alliance. I think I'm going to have my friend Jackson Buzingo join us here as well. We'll see if he can make it on. And then also we have one more. Oh, Jan is joining us from the Climate Landscapes. So today is going to be a big conversation. I know each of you are experts in your own subject matter, but what I thought is that we could take the opportunity to have you share a little bit about your work, but also from the lens of the relationships between these things. I think that's the most interesting intersection, is the relationships between these ecologies, and how when we work together to be restorers of these ecologies, they naturally begin the cycle of cooling the planet, rehydrating the planet, fertilizing the soils, all of these issues that we're facing, that people are looking at the problem and there's not enough looking at what the solutions are. And I'm really excited to have you tailor your conversations today as you share to this intersectionality of solution sets that, when come together, really create a really powerful opportunity for ecological rebalancing. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge, because the Open Future Forum is only possible because of the incredible amount of partnerships and incredible rich network that we have the pleasure of working with. So I do want to thank the American Sustainable Business Network, Bluefin Investment, the Eco Restoration Alliance, which are particular sponsors for today, El Puente, Global Unity, the Guild of Future Architects, Heartland P5, Imagine World, the Institute of Ecotechnics, who's been here and sharing much today, Intergen Family, Kinship Earth, the North Carolina Agricultural Technical State University, Partnerships for Change, Pro-Social World, Reconsider, Toxic Free Future for Our Children, Triangle Foundation, and United Refuge. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I welcome a very active chat, and I'm going to hand that first actually to my friend Ananda. Ananda, I'd love for you to share some of your work and insights about this relationship of these elementals and how we can work more wisely with them to help cool the planet. Thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen here. Whoops. Whoops. Hold on a sec. Why is it not showing up? Oh, I don't know what's going wrong. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right.
There you go.
So,
this format's fine if that's easy for you. We can see it pretty clearly. You had it nice and big there. Oh, slideshow. That'll do it.
no.
Thank you.
There we go. There we go. All right. All right. Yeah. So I'm a storyteller. This is my book, and I'm not going to go into the details of this presentation because I'm really speaking to the choir here. But in a way, whoops, why is it switching? So sorry, we're switching backward. It's not behaving. Sorry, my screen share is not behaving. Anyway, just to say that I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's flipping on its own. Okay, you know what? I'm going to stop doing that.
Technology's like, just tell a story.
Yeah,
Stories to tell.
Yeah. So this presentation was really about because what I like to do is to share this information in a way that is really accessible to regular people and not so geeky. And we've been talking about creating some kind of an artifact. So how can we tell the world this story without it being too complicated? And I think really the story that we want to tell is not it's a yes and not a yes but when we to the carbon narrative, because carbon and water are the basis of life. All life is really made out of carbon and water, and it's plants that are the infrastructure that make those two cycles work together. So when we're talking about plants, we really start with the soil ecosystem, and the soil isn't an ecosystem unless it's living. So it's all the microbes that live in the soil that make the soil a living ecosystem and make it functional and enable it to be the driver of the carbon cycle and the water cycle. So it starts with the soil. The soil, the living organisms in the soil are what give the soil structure, and it's the soil structure that enable it to store carbon and to store water and to percolate water and to do all of those good things. And we can't even talk about living soil unless there's plants in it. We might as well be talking about human beings except for the stomach or something like that, because it really is the presence of plants in the soil ecosystem that make it work. And every single plant has its own microbiome that attracts all of the things it needs. And the place where everything is really happening, the really dynamic place, is the rhizosphere. And so the rhizosphere is that place where the soil microbiome intersects with the roots of plants. And that's where there's the most biodiversity, the most stuff that's happening. So the bigger and deeper the rhizosphere, the more functional the soil ecosystem is, the more it runs the carbon and water cycle. So that's where it's really all happening. So we really need to recognize that there's no soil without plants, and the carbon and the water cycle don't work without plants. And so when we're talking about carbon, sometimes the way we talk about carbon, it's almost as if it's this stuff that we got to suck out of the air and shove down in the earth, and then everything is going to be fixed. But it's a cycle. The carbon cycle and the water cycle are both cycles, and they need to work as cycles. So when we think about plants use the energy of photosynthesis, they take the carbon from the atmosphere, they turn it into liquid, and then they exude it through their roots. And that's what feeds the microorganisms in the soil. And they exchange that carbon for all the other elements that only they can provide to the plants. And then that creates biomass. And biomass is really what life is all about, because as the plants grow, animals eat plants, carnivores eat the animals, and it creates biomass. And the living biomass on the earth is really what stored carbon is. And of course, it cycles. There's waste materials. When life dies, some of it goes back into the earth and some of it goes back into the air. But we have to think about carbon as living biomass. And, so that's life. And the more we decrease the amount of life, of biomass on the earth, the more out of balance we get. And it's the same thing for the water cycle. It's the plants that use the energy of heat at the earth, suck up the liquid water, and then put that water up into the sky, where it does the water cycle. If we don't have plants taking the water out of the ground and bringing it back up to the sky, we don't have rain and we don't have clouds. So without rain and clouds, the water cycle doesn't work. And that's really the basis of the small water cycle, that we've all been talking about, is that movement of water between the air and the sky. So we've got water cycling. So that is all super important. And without vegetation, none of these things are happening. And it really is the quality of the vegetation, because if the water is going up into the air and it's not forming properly formed clouds, then we're not going to get rain. We're going to get haze. That's what happens when the water molecules cling onto tiny little particles of pollution in the air, and they just become haze, which the sun goes through and heats up, and then water becomes a greenhouse gas. So, so we really need to vegetate the earth. And there's three major ecosystems that we need in order to keep this whole thing running, to keep the carbon and the water cycle working. So of course, there's the soil, the living soil. Without living soil, the water isn't going to percolate into the earth. The next system is the forest. And, if you think about forest, that is a lot of biomass. Like if you imagine a cornfield or a city or whatever, compared to a forest just has an incredible amount of biomass. And there is much biomass underneath the ground as there is on top of the ground. And so all of this biomass is both carbon and water sequestered. And then when you add in evapotranspiration, making the clouds, creating rain, we have a really amazingly functional ecosystem. And the third ecosystem that's really essential for keeping all this happening is wetlands, because the water needs to get into the ground. And what wetlands really do, they're collector systems. Then they balance out, they give us resilience, because in the extremes of too dry or too wet, which we're getting more and more of now with climate change, it's really important to collect the too much water when it comes and to keep it in the ground so that it provides resilience for when there isn't enough. And so wetlands are really those collector systems that gather the water when it's too much and allow it to percolate in. And if there isn't any groundwater, if the water isn't percolating into the ground, then we don't have that kind of resilience, and the small water cycle doesn't work. When the water goes into the ground, it hits a place where it can't percolate anymore, and then it starts building up pressure, and it's that pressure which makes the water come up to feed the plants, which feeds springs, and also feeds the lakes and rivers and all the water systems in the summertime, and when there's not enough rain. The reason that they don't dry up is because of these reserves in the ground. So we need wetlands. So we've got these three ecosystems: soil, forests, and wetlands. And of course, there's a lot of nuances and things in between, like grasslands and whatnot. But basically, these ecosystems are what is keeping the balance for us with the carbon cycle and the water cycle and making life continue. And so there's three things that we need to do. We need to preserve all of those ecosystems that are still intact, because there's just not enough of them left anymore. And if for the ones where they've been destroyed, we need to restore them to the extent that's possible. And then we have like all the place that humans take up on the land. And so what we really need to do there is we need to create human-driven ecosystems that give us those ecosystem functions. So if we understand how soil, forests, and wetlands work, and we understand the need for them, then we have to integrate that into our human-operated ecosystems. And so by creating water retention landscapes, regenerative agriculture, and just integrating all of these things in, we can recreate the surface of the land to actually do the ecosystem functions that preserve life. So that is.
Thank you so much, Ananda. Again, you've been one of my mentor teachers, as many in this space have learned so much, and I appreciate that synopsis. I think you've laid out the landscape, and now I'm really excited for others to continue to come and fill in the bodies of wisdom and knowledge. But thank you, Ananda, and please put some information in the chat about your work and about your book as well. And for the sake of time, I think we have about 5 minutes for each presenter, and I did want to go to Philip next from the Flow Partnership, because that's some of the work you're doing is on the ground, doing the restoration of these waterways. And I think it's really important to share your body of work after Ananda has shared. Please go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ananda, for giving that great summary. And it's great to be in a room full of people who understand the water cycle as fundamental to the real climate instability at the moment. And maybe one thing I can add is that when the trees evaporate the water, it's not only the water goes into the sky, but that it changes its state from water to vapor. And in doing that, it has a dramatic cooling effect, because it needs energy to make that jump. And when it does the jump the other way from vapor into the clouds, it releases that energy high up in the atmosphere, and it can go off to space. So it has an enormous cooling effect. But I didn't realize how much the cooling effect was until I was busy in a project in India. And I just want to share that with you a little, because it really amazed me. This was a project where we were working between scientists and communities, and we were trying to see what is the bridge between the science and the community. And the way we began, I might just share the screen. So I can share with you, oops, what's happening. So I hope you can all see this screen, which is coming up. So the way we began the project of trying to make this link between the science and the community, if you can all see this screen, was we started by working with the farmers and interviewing them to see what was the state. Hang on. We started by interviewing all the farmers, and this was between University of Leicester and IIT Kanpur and us. We started by interviewing the farmers in this area we were looking at to get their view of what was their situation with regard to the water. And we got a variety of responses. So these were all the farmers we interviewed. And if I click on one of these, you'll see in the north of the area, this is a bit tricky with all the, all right. In the north of the area, they described, so that the water level in the wells was only 20 feet deep. The source of water was irrigation from the canals and bore wells. There were many ponds present. Water was plentiful. They were rearing fish in the wells. There were hundreds of bore wells in the village. So it was a very rosy picture. However, when we got to the north and we interviewed the farmers, it was a very different picture. That it was a much deeper level that the water was. The source was bore well. There were 2 to 3 ponds, all in a poor state. So no farmer cultivates paddy in that they have no means to get to water. The land in this village is not connected with the water from the canal. The river is a kilometre away and adjacent lands get flooded. All the ponds are filled with silt. Every people used to make doors for solid houses with the silt. So there was a complete change of care from the south to the north. And we then, once we'd got this base map, we started looking at the satellite data from the university. And let me just, I know I've only got a couple of minutes. So let me just scroll down so we get to the really meaty bit. So here we got to the satellite data from the community. And it was only when I was traveling to give a presentation to the community that I overlaid the satellite data onto the map. And this is satellite data of the temperature. And you can see here that there's a portion of the temperature which is like 5 degrees lower. It's about 304 degrees Kelvin to the red areas, which are like 312 Kelvin. And this line of coolness exactly follows the canal. And the canal is not just this one stream, it's got lots of little canals that go off the main canal. So it brings water to the whole area. And in the particular area where we were, those in the south were on the canal and had this coolness, and those in the north and those in the south were very much hotter. And it became clear that the canal had got silted up. There was no water in one area at the south. And so it was 6 or 7 degrees hotter than where they were able to grow paddy and vegetation. And this water cycle was existing. And it's so incredible that we talk about 1 or 2 degrees heating from the carbon. But this is 5 or 6 degrees that the water cycle is cooling the land. And you feel that on a sunny day if you stand by the water under a tree. And it just shows that what we're talking about here is not some marginal effect. that is kind of a side to carbon. It's a huge effect, a huge cooling effect that we're completely missing out on by allowing lands to get desertified and feeding this feedback loop of higher temperatures, drier land, and this breakdown of the water cycle. So that's what I'd like to present. There's a lot more satellite data that connected with the canal, but I think it's an incredible story, and that the community really enjoyed seeing this presentation and seeing the evidence that if you don't care for the water cycle, it has dramatic effects on your well-being, your ability to grow rice, and the temperature of your land. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that window into real proper community engagement in relation to the water cycle.
Yeah, Philip, thank you so much. Please do put the resources in the chat too for your incredible projects and for the water school. But it's really interesting to see. It's just so obvious. It's so maddening sometimes how clear and obvious the data and the science is and how compelling it is. And yet somehow still this is a conversation that needs sort of so much more attention from this. But really appreciate, Philip, you sharing that today, and really have great respect for the work you're doing with the Flow Partnership. So do share your links in the chat. And I want to hand the floor now over to Erica Gies, who's with us, author of The Water Always Wins. And I'm love for you to layer in your perspectives on this conversation, Erica. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jamaica. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've really enjoyed what the other speakers have had to say. Yeah, so I've recently published this book, Water Always Wins. It's the North America and UK editions there. And the basic premise of the book is very much in line with what the other speakers have talked about. And basically it's about changing dominant culture's relationship with water. So, you know, the dominant culture is very human, one might say supremacist, in that humans are more important than the environment, separate from the environment. And when you have that lens, you tend to see water as either a commodity or a threat. And that really inspires people to single-minded problem solving. You know, you need water, so you build a dam and you bring it from somewhere else and collect it. Or you have a problem with flooding, so you build a levee to, you know, block the water from that particular spot. But it's really ignoring systems theory, right? Like water is an entity with agency that has its own relationships with rock and soil, microbes, plants, beavers, humans. And when we ignore the complexity of those systems in our problem solving, that's when we generate all of these unintended negative consequences. So there are people in my book who live closer to the land and understand these systems as a matter of survival. Indigenous people in the Americas, people in India, Peru, elsewhere. The book goes around the world to these places, to Kenya, to England. But the common thread in all of these projects by what I call the water detectives, who are people who approach water rather than arrogance, like a control mindset. They approach it with humility. They want to understand, what does water want and how can we provide it? And one of the points that I make is the single focus problem solving has had massive impacts on our water cycle. We've actually filled or drained 87% of the world's wetlands. We've intervened with dams and diversions on 2/3 of the world's largest rivers. The area of our cities covered by pavement has doubled just since 1992. So a point I try to make is that, yes, climate change is fueling water extremes and making you know, much bigger rainstorms, much more severe droughts, but our development choices are playing a significant role in making these problems so much worse. And the flip side of that is, like, we have an opportunity to do things differently. to make space for water again, to be able to conduct its natural cycles to a much greater extent. And certainly groundwater is key to that. All of the projects I looked at around the world are trying to heal that groundwater surface water connection. So I came to think of these projects as flow water. And that's my website is slowwater.world. It talks about the book and some of the people in the book. But the idea of slow water is restoring places for water to move underground. So that's wetlands, floodplains, high altitude forests, and mountain meadows, and to reconnect those systems. And some aspects to slow water are respecting water's agency. These are distributed solutions rather than the centralized dam. You know, they're scattered across the landscape throughout the watershed. And when you think about that 87% of the world's wetlands that we've eradicated, it makes sense that we need to be looking for places all throughout. And there's definitely a community facing aspect to this. So in dominant culture, we've come to see water management as handled by the experts, and then they deliver it to us. But in these projects around the world, there are communities who are actively maintaining their water systems, and that helps them understand on a really fundamental level the extent of the resource and what it means to care for it. But there are examples in, say, the United States where that is more of an educational component. So it's like, you know, maybe they're taking water and recharging it in a wetland, and it's become a recreation area for people. And then there's educational signage. So people may not be actively helping maintain the resource, but they're connecting with it in a more explicit way. So I guess, yeah, the general message is that I think also what people were saying about the carbon cycle, you know, that's another example of this single-minded problem solving, you know, like let's plant a plantation of pine trees because they grow so fast and they'll absorb more carbon, but that's ignoring the carbon in the soil and the water cycle and all this. So in all these ways, I think, you know, systems theory and making space for water to be able to conduct its systems. We tend to push things to the brink and think like we need optimal efficiency and we need to maximize. But what we really need to do is to step back a little and to allow flux in the system, to allow these natural ecosystems to work. So I could say a lot more, but I know time is short. So thank you.
Erica, thank you so much. I will say that we have this ongoing conversation both in Eco Restoration Alliance, Regenerative Water Alliance. There's lots of opportunities to continue this discussion, and I hope that we do, because I particularly really respect the approach and the like, how do I say this? I want to say what I appreciated about what you shared was the living waters, was the intelligence and respecting the intelligence of the living waters, you know, within us and in the world. And to work with those natural intelligences is such a incredibly humbling of human arrogance, but required at this time for any sort of, you know, symbiotic relationship to occur. So I really respect your work, and I look forward to hearing more about it, and we'll invite you into other contexts, because there's a lot of us here that have these conversations regularly, actually. And then one of the most important things that we're talking about is how to bring this information out into the world. How do we translate this knowledge and wisdom and science and data into formats that can affect change and help people try to understand, and what do those different audiences need. And what I would like to do next is hand that to you, Marcel, who's working with Green Water Cools, an initiative that I think is definitely trying to bring this particular message to several audiences, particularly business and corporate leaders and government leaders, and try to help translate this in a way that starts to hopefully impact decisions that are being made. But thank you, Erica, and Marcel, please go ahead and share.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. The mission from Green Water is that to create awareness that when nature creates clouds to a very biodiverse landscape that will help us reach Paris much faster, cheaper, with less risk, and also more social perspective. And what I learned from Lester Brown is we really need to make a club sandwich. So we need to have the macro view and the micro view. So there is so many things going on, permaculture, restoring the landscapes, etc., and so much value in it. And we have to get that value also to the top so that we can change the rules of the game so that we can increase the speed going forward. So I will give, what my intention is to give a macro view. So I will talk a little bit very briefly about the essence, what's the elephant in the room. The green water cycle is already known. And then approaches how to get to the macro level and also connected with the implementation. And very important also about storytelling, because at the moment, yesterday we had a great conference from Stefan Schwarzer, and you have all the science in the room, but we need to also tell the story to the right person and changing the rules of the game, and creating the action perspective for society. So when you go back to the essence, then the essence is that it's a very simple calculation. So if you have the balance of Earth, 1 minus 1 is 0. Yeah, you can increase the temperature of Earth by increasing the warming potential. So warming minus cooling is 0. If you increase the warming potential, for example, more carbon dioxide in the air, you raise temperature. But if you lower the cooling capacity, you get the same result. And what we learned from all the research that we have and all the knowledge is that when you have high biodiverse landscapes, they produce cooling clouds, and those clouds cool. And those essence, the most essential elements in the equation is, sorry, something's going wrong. If you go into the green water cycle, you see that you need to have organic aerosols and water vapor to form those clouds. So also what Ananda was saying, if you don't have organic aerosols and you don't have water vapor, then you have a big problem. And when the landscapes are not connected with large surface areas, your biotic pump will not function. So your resource of water will be low. Of course, you will have the water flow from the rain, but if you have fully functioning biotic pump, then the increase of water, the landscape will be much higher. So if you, and one of the stories also is that we have to tell people that about the North Pole. There are a lot of people saying, well, the North Pole is the refrigerator of Earth, but they forget that the refrigerator of Earth are the forests, the landscapes, because they cool via the sun and do the evaporation. Therefore, we have ice on the North Pole. This cause and effect, and people are forgetting that most of the time. What we also have done is we have done a lot of research in the effect of temperature, and not only that you can see that there is a high correlation between the amount of people on Earth and the amount of carbon dioxide and deforestation and temperature effects, but also that since 1880, but also when you look back in history, you see those same effects, except you don't have carbon dioxide in the air, additional from burning lots of fossil fuel. But from history, you can see that when deforestation kicks in, the precipitation went down, and also temperature rise. So there's a very clear relationship between temperature and deforestation. And when there are diseases, you see that forests come back and temperature drops. So there's all kinds of insight that you have to take into account. But storytelling is also very important. If you don't connect, so when we stay in the bubble, then it will be very difficult for reaching the right person. So on the micro level, you can do great jobs in the community. But if you don't get on a large scale in Europe, or in Africa, or in Amazonia, don't get the right stakeholders on board, you've got problems of making real change on a larger scale. So storytelling is not only for towards politicians, but also towards the Heinekens and Unilevers of this world. So we are now also focusing on those companies. And what we want to tell them, please, I want to have a real cool beer. So with clean water inside. And if the Heinekens and the Unilevers of the world, if Heineken can serve a real cool ice cream with high biodiverse forest in it, then there's a double joy for eating ice cream or having a beer. But also storytelling for children. So you have to take every stakeholder in mind. What will be the message? How do we tell it? And also, if you look for storytelling towards politicians, then you have to, or institutional investors, you have to talk in very different language. So politicians and perhaps institutional investors, they understand minimizing regret. What is that? So we have, as mankind, we have a choice to make. Are we going to restore nature, yes or no? And when the research is correct and all the insights that we have are correct, there's a huge potential because it will start cooling and even start stabilizing climate and even start cooling. If the research is not correct, then no harm is done because you still have all kind of big positives like water security, food security, livelihood, and you have harvested carbon. So you also have a risk-free experiment. This is the research. If we don't restore nature, then the best outcome will be, well, there's no regret, but you have a huge regret if you don't restore nature, and we are correct. So when the challenge will be, if a CEO from of a company or politicians know about the cooling role of nature, let him do or she do the challenge and tell this story to an 8-year-old, 12-year-old, or an 18-year-old, why he or she is not going to restore nature. And the other language is that you can reduce the assets at risk. So that's a story for institutional investors. And then you say, okay, we fully stick to the carbon budget for Paris, but we are going to do two things. We're going to separate the carbon credits in clean energy and energy saving credits, so the gray carbons, and the credits in nature. But then we're going to tilt the investments towards nature and bring and maximize those investments and bring it forward in time. When we are right, then you get that your cooling capacity will increase and you are going to stabilize and even cool down. So these are the stories that we are focusing on for the different stakeholders. And for doing so, what our main barrier is at this moment, we really need to have good storytellers. So you need to have a campaign, you need media professionals that can make visuals. And I worked several years ago, 7-8 years ago, with a great storytelling, great visualizer. Unfortunately, he died, but he could make everything sexy. He said, you have to make it sexy. You have to make it sexy for every stakeholder that you can think about. And that's what we are focusing on the moment. So we're looking for the next step. For us, it's about financing that part. Also creating a knowledge platform so that's making very easy for all the scientists, but also all the stakeholders to get the knowledge that they need. Raising awareness is important. Mobilization is very important, but then you need to have a club sandwich because you need to have change of the rules. And also getting involved the institutional investors. And then the 3 topics that we would like to see is that we have a trustworthy validation of the cooling role, and not exactly, but more the lower bar. We want to evaluate the climate insurance policy, so seeing the real value of nature. And then this will be about the inventory of value cases. And what we mean with the value cases is that if you look around the world, you will see the red arrows are the prevailing winds, the blue arrows, the rivers in the sky, the yellow arrows, the biotic pumps, and these are the atmospheric cells. You have to know where are the biggest value cases that you have to look into. So the Amazon rainforest, West African rainforest, North America, European biotic pump, the Asian biotic pump, India, Australia, and on a smaller scale, we are working in the Netherlands because in the Netherlands landscape, we have a big problem from nitrogen because of bio industry. So then you can do some cool farming if you change the landscape. But you have to first start with the value case. If the value case is there, then the business case will follow because you have the right rules in the game. So this is in the helicopter view of the working field that we are doing at the moment. And once more, what we need at this moment is very good people that can set up a campaign and do worldwide enormous storytelling. And you need to have the different stories for the different stakeholders, politicians, companies, investors, people in the street, children. Let the children ask their parents, their grandparents, the right questions at the dinner table.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. So a few things. I was going to have Jan share next, but I think it's actually a good segue because I think I know what Rob's going to share, and I think it's a really good segue. So Jan, I'm going to have you go after Rob, but I do want to acknowledge time as well. We're going to take 5 over in the session because we started a bit late because of the roundtable of demonstration projects. But Marcel, I also wanted to say that later in the day, in fact, at 2:30, right after basically the session after this one, we have a session on media and storytelling, cooperative strategies for media and storytelling to drive change. And we have a bunch of filmmakers and campaigners who were taking that exact question to how do we mobilize? So I know it's late for you there, but what you're naming is part of the setup of this whole ecosystem. So we take what you've just done and said, okay, now let's give that knowledge and information to those who are here to amplify media and story and drive action and change. So I'm excited to, even if you won't be on, you should definitely share your presentation and we can put it in the resources for that particular session later today. But for now, if Jan doesn't mind if I swap for the sake of a really good flow, I think, Rob, I'd love for you to go ahead and share your presentation. And let's just try to leave time for Jan and Alpha also to wrap us up. And like I said, we'll go about 5 over today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamaica. And thank you, Marcel. You've done a lot of the explanation that I don't have to do. And basically what I'm going to tell is partly an extension of what you have been telling. Actually, it's clear that all of us here in the room understand the importance of the water cycle. And so that's where I'm going to start, if I can get this one going. Yes. So again, this one, I'm a climate activist. I'm not a scientist, not an expert. I know a bit of everything. And I know that we're in trouble and that trouble could accelerate very fast. So we need to regenerate and cool the planet fast. And with that, and before that, we can actually calm the weather extremes. So where are we with the health of the planet? One of the questions I quite often ask, and I don't think there's time for it now, is what is your timeline that you think that we need to turn things around before we are actually going into a cascading collapse of basically biomes, ecosystems, and with that societies, because we're fully grounded and dependent on it. So it's clear, all the people in the room have already basically are all in the same knowledge that focusing on greenhouse gases alone will actually get us all killed, because we're actually missing a lot of the story. And we have to understand the amazing intelligence that is embedded in nature. We simply need to look what nature does and imitate that. Biomimicry is probably the great science of the future, applied science. So we need to wake up to our destructive behavior and change fast. Now, you probably all are familiar with this article about the climate tipping points in the system, which actually a lot of them have to do with the disruption of the water cycle and the destruction of vegetation. And I think it's very good to see the world as a complex living system, a self-regulating body, and it makes it also much easier to understand how we should help while the planet is in trouble. I compare the situation quite often to stage 3 cancer. The symptoms are beginning to show, but people are not really aware that something is wrong. It's just sort of something that's lingering out there. But if you wait too long, then basically we'll go into cascading collapse of ecosystems, and the show is roughly over. Doesn't mean that humans will disappear from the planet, but there will certainly a lot less of us. and the in-between time is not going to be exactly very much fun. The one thing that I would like to mention again is that recent studies have shown that the forest in the blue areas actually that you see around the equator have already been shown to cool the planet, do an eco-service to the planet of right now cooling the planet by 1 degree, which actually makes, Marcel has already has told us that some of the counting is pretty simple. If you would be able somehow to double them, then basically we would be cooling the planet, and if you would erase them, we would race past Paris goals of 2 and probably 3 and maybe more. So, and again with Marcel, actually, he talks about one elephant, and actually I brought his twin brother, Marcel, if you don't mind. First of all, there's 2 climate elephants in the room. The first one is that global warming is mainly caused by land use change by humans and disrupting with that living soils, vegetation, forests, and water cycle. And the second one is that land use change actually results in these droughts, heat waves, floods, water and food crises, and with that all the social stress that is already pushing at societies around the world. But we have more elephants. Because the good news is we actually, certainly in this group of people, we know the solutions. We've seen all kinds of beautiful examples. We can solve the climate crisis if we act now at scale by revitalizing the biosphere. Heal soils, vegetation, forests, hydrate land, restore water cycles and ocean life, healthy landscapes and seas, produce clouds and precipitation, and this will actually calm the weather and cool climate. Healthy landscapes actually all produce clouds, precipitation, and cool. So the question is, and that's why I'm not going too much into the interaction between water and the biosphere, because we all are basically we are privy to that. But the question is how do we get it scaled on time, so that we're not going to cascading collapse and we can actually turn the situation around. The first and very obvious one is that we need a global moratorium on logging of existing natural forests now, not 2030, as they said last time in COP26. We need a global Marshall Plan to regenerate 1 billion hectares of degraded land with climate-smart landscaping, healing soils, vegetation, and the water cycle. We need to think globally and act locally. Regeneration needs to happen everywhere, but, and I will explain that soon, the primary focus needs to be on the tropics. We need to redesign and localize, as we all know, our food production, and it needs to be aligned with nature. And we need to include the biotic pump in the plans to connect the small and water cycles, the large water cycles, because quite often we're just thinking about the water cycles on land, but there's a large connection between the huge vapor rivers, the atmospheric rivers coming from the seas, and the interaction with the vegetation on land, which needs to be understood better. So very quickly, I just want to show that the biomass creation and the biological activity is much more around the equator for obvious reasons. There's more sun coming in there. This is a sequence of a whole year. And also for the very same reason that there's more sunlight coming in, it's warmer over there and there's more vapor, which also means that the combination of bioactivity, temperature, and water vapor actually have positive cascading positive impacts if we are able to regenerate there. And on the other hand, it will cascade down very fast if we let things get out of hand in these zones.
Rob will have you take about 1 more minute.
Okay, I'll make it short. So actually, one of the things that we were already talking about, we need to spread the news. Basically, it's a hopeful message. We can actually cool the planet and calm the weather if we all start to regenerate. And I think that is one of the most important things, tell the story. And who do we need to wake up to get the story? First of all, the scientific community, drop your carbon vision. The financial elite, Marcel already talked about it. All your assets will be lost if you don't act, and investing in regeneration will actually give you a lot more. Will give you a great return on investments. The farmers, especially in the global south, you can be the heroes of regeneration, and the world needs to pay you for your wonderful services to restore the lands. The climate youth need to stop focusing on protesting and instead lead the global regeneration movement, because they want to cool the planet, and we know how to do it. The politicians can tell their voters that we can actually resolve the climate crisis reasonably fast in about 2 decades if we act at the scale necessary. So they can actually bring a hopeful message to the people. Governments and institutions need to listen and need to support regeneration without bureaucracy and delay. They are using far too much red tape to come to help. And the world, let's act. We can create a beautiful future for our children, and it will be actually exciting to do so. But we have to act now because we're running out of time. It is obvious what we will get in return if we succeed to do this: diminishing weather extremes locally within years. I've seen that in my own valley. Global temperatures going down by 2040, substantial reduction of poverty and vitalized rural communities, especially in the global south, water and food security, regeneration of biodiversity, and most SDGs improved. I don't have enough time, but I can just tell you that one of the things that need to be built is the digital Gaia, which is a tool set of important technical tools where we can basically show all the work and coordinate. And of course, Jamaica and Katie are working on Open Impact, which is a platform for regenerators, which is one of the elements. We have to be fast. We have to tell this story everywhere, and certainly at COP27, that we can cool the planet and that people have to listen up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. Please do, if you have the opportunity, to share that particular resource in the chat. I think it's good for people to have more time with it. I want to acknowledge we're a few minutes over. We're going to go ahead and have Jan, I'd still love for you to share even just acknowledgement of your work and references and ways for people to be able to understand and connect more with the work that you're doing. And then Alpha, I know you have 1 minute of share as well. And I deeply apologize for squashing. I think the reality of the nature of conversations like this is we need days, not an hour. But I still appreciate the shares that have come in today. And for those of you just joining the room, we're going to take a few more minutes and make sure we wrap this session in a good way before we begin the next one. So Jan, please feel free to share a bit. And then
thank you, Jamaica, and great to be here. Just a few words on myself. I'm a business guy. I'm a venture capitalist. 5.5 years ago, I didn't know anything about regenerative agriculture. Then I read Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore Dilemma, and that kind of changed my life. I realized there's a solution, and that was eye-opening for me. I deeply digged into it, and 2.5 years later, I realized that these regenerative farmers are basically entrepreneurs who have a business model that is aligned with nature, and that the whole economy needs to move in this direction, and that we need a regenerative economy. And I also learned from Walter Jehne, who you most likely all have heard of, about the soil, water, vegetation cycle that Ananda has pointed out. And the thing that blew my mind is there's a solution which is so scalable and so significant, and nobody's talking about it. And you cannot read anything in the press about it. And I knew Stefan, I knew a few other people, and we created this network called Landscape, the Landscape Conference, or Climate Landscape, sorry. And the intention really was first to bring scientists together to really show that there is scientific evidence that this really works, because most of the questions you get when you raise these points is that people say, well, where's the science? And we yesterday had the third Climate Landscape Conference, and I can only report back that there were really very well-known scientists from Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, from Stockholm, from Bern, and they all confirmed vegetation is the way to go. And basically the challenge is, how do we connect the unexpected? How do we bring the people who are typically not confronted with these ideas together? And I mean, we're now here in a room where we are all preaching to the convinced, but how do we connect this to business people? How do we connect this to policymakers? And that's really the intention of the Climate Landscape Conference. And we are beginning. I think there is huge effort still to be done. I think the reason that nobody is talking about is not because there is a confrontation between the carbon-focused people and the others. It's simply that Jimmy Carter in the 50s organized the first conference on climate research, and the scientists came to the conclusion that the water thing is just too big. We cannot handle it, so we focus on carbon dioxide, and that's how it started. And I think so. We just need. They have 50 years of storytelling, and now we need to scale the storytelling, as Marcel said. And I think that's the real challenge. So I hope that is helpful, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's very important. Again, I want to have more time with these conversations. We'd like to invite you back to the spaces that we're continuing, including Alpha has been co-convener with me of the Regenerative Water Alliance and has a bit of to share about a coming session that we have that's of very much relevance. But what I appreciate again is that the storytelling session later, the bridge building between those who have the story, those who have the capital, those who have the science, those who are telling the stories, is a very important bridge, and one that we're actively seeking to be an agent of, and appreciate your work and look forward to learning more. Please do share any resources in the chat. Alpha, we are in the other session now technically, but we want to have you have the opportunity to wrap and with the minute that you wanted to share, and then the invitation to the session that we're hosting for the Regenerative Water Alliance. Thank you, Alpha. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I think a lot of you have, a couple of you, half of you have been in the Regenerative Water Alliance. And I think what the carbon story is kind of simple. It's the greenhouse effect heats, but the water story is a lot more complex because it's a systems thinking story. So there's many aspects to it. So I think what would be good if all of us kind of come to a bit more of a consensus and synchrony, and then we can brand and market our efforts a bit more coherently. And so what we'd like to do is kind of see what people think about, like, the 5 key water stories, because I think some of us still know some and maybe not others. Like, I just talked to a hydroclimatologist who's sharing that her research shows that the groundwater affects how much rain there is, and no one's really talking about that story. And I think there's different people here, like Erica Gies with the branding as slow water, and Marcel as the green water cools, and Zach Weiss with the water death spiral. Like, if we can figure out how we kind of coordinate our marketing and our branding, I think we have a lot more reach. And so here's if I could just share my screen real briefly. Is there a way to do this? So what are the water stories that we have? So I've just kind of briefly listed, and there may be more, but like, can we come to kind of some consensus? Which are the key things that we should really focus on? Evapotranspiration cools the earth, small water cycle creates rain, hydraulic lift keeps the soil wet, wetlands cleans water. Cities can recycle soil water, organic soil absorbs more rainwater, slowing water keeps continents hydrated, tile drainage wastes water, wetlands humidify winds which lessen wildfires, wetlands replenish groundwater. Groundwater is our water bank. Groundwater increases the small water cycle. Groundwater quenches wildfires. Forests attract rain. Biodiversity increases small water cycle. Absorb rainfall to lessen droughts, fires, fire heat. Dams block fish, sediment, wetland, and groundwater. Plants regulate heat via water. So there's a lot of stories. So can we kind of figure out how we brand it, maybe create animations, kind of coordinate all our things? So I'd like to invite all of you to our November 3rd event with the Regenerative Water Alliance, and I put the link to our newsletter, the regenerativewater.substack.com, where we have info on that event. So yeah, it'd be great if we can kind of coordinate our efforts. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alpha. For the sake of time, we're going to wrap for today, but I deeply appreciate all of your contributions, and even the narrative weaving from the science to how do we tell this story and how do we come together to tell the story. So please, if you would like to continue on, join us for the session that we're doing on November 5th. But I think we're actively looking at how we can become more mobilized as an effort in common versus all the individual efforts people are so nobly trying to advance. I think we have so much we can advance in common. So thank you to everybody who shared today. I am going to officially wrap this particular session. The next session coming up is a conversation of intergenerational bridge building with Intergen Family, hosting and moderating. Also in the other room, we have a conversation on, I believe it's the Beyond Carbon conversation that is up as well. And that's happening in the other link, which I'll put in the chat really quickly. And then after that, we'll have that session I've been alluding to in this one, the cooperative strategies for leveraging media and storytelling to drive change. And then one more really important one today that I would really love to invite people back to is that from 3:30 to 5, that specific time, we'll have the Restoring the Planetary Reciprocity with Rights of Nature, Sovereignty, and Land Stewardship. And I think that is a session that I'm particularly holding a heart space for to wrap this incredible forum. So thank you for everybody who's joined. I'll stop the video. I'll really quickly put the other link in the chat if you want to join the Beyond Carbon conversation. And thank you to all the presenters today and all your incredible work. And thank you to those who've been patient for the next session. Appreciating you so much. And we're going to pause right here.
Thank you.